On this edition of Crime Chronicles, I come to you from what was once called the most wicked city in the United States, Phenix City, Alabama. We'll take a look at crime in Dixie, assassination, and the Dixie Mafia on this edition of Crime Chronicles. I'm standing on a bridge that connects Columbus, Georgia with Phenix City, Alabama. Behind me and in front of me is the Chattahoochee River, which separates the two states. To my left is Phenix City, Alabama. To my right, Columbus, Georgia. Phenix City, Alabama, even before it was renamed Phenix City in the early 20th century, it was called Girard, has been a hotbed of crime of one sort or another since its inception in the early 19th century. Over time, this criminal enterprise grew to the point where criminal syndicates ran the city of Phenix City. What kind of crimes were committed in Phenix City? Any and every kind of crime long before the 1950s. Phenix City, or Girard, had long been a haven for people on the run from authorities. Some, like people escaping slavery for legitimate reasons, and others because they were wanted for crimes. People actually journeyed to Phenix City to take courses in safecracking. While the textile and iron industries were the big employers across the river in Columbus, Georgia, crime was Phenix City's biggest employer. Commercial gambling, often with loaded dice, marked cards, or rigged slot machines, and the manufacture of these implements employed many Phenix City residents. Prostitution, human trafficking, selling the babies of prostitutes, stealing from and robbing patrons, and murder were common in Phenix City. The Chattahoochee River was filled with the bodies of victims of Phenix City's criminal syndicates. While Phenix City, or Girard, had been a crime haven for as long as it had existed, a boon to organized crime there came when the U.S. Army established Camp Benning, later known as Fort Benning, and now called Fort Moore, just after World War I. Young, gullible soldiers were ripe targets for the criminal element in Phenix City. Prostitutes stole from soldiers, gamblers cheated them, and soldiers were often assaulted and sometimes even killed in Phenix City. Although soldiers were repeatedly warned about going to Phenix City, and sometimes even banned, the lure of Phenix City was too tempting for young, immature, adventurous men away from home for the first time. Phenix City even visited the Fort Benning area advertising their quote-unquote services with the hope of luring soldiers across the small bridge across the Chattahoochee River that separated Columbus from Phenix City. According to some, Phenix City incurred the wrath of General George Patton just before World War II. When word reached Patton that some of his soldiers had been jailed unjustifiably, he supposedly ordered a tank be parked in front of the jail, with orders to destroy it if his soldiers were not released. Why weren't corrupt officials simply removed from their positions? Why was it so hard to clean up Phenix City? The answer: there was no such thing as an honest election in Phenix City or Russell County. Phenix City's criminal syndicates rigged elections, intimidated voters, hand-selected candidates, and in short, ensured that their criminal livelihoods would continue. Even at the state level, Phenix City criminals had power. Some were afraid to deal with the syndicates there, some were compromised by those syndicates, and many others simply did not care. Phenix City was a small town far removed from the more populated political and business centers of Alabama, like Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile. Two of the most notable names of the 20th century were the two men who dominated these syndicates: an English immigrant named Jimmy Matthews and a Columbus, Georgia native named Hoyt Shepard. Matthews and Shepard were part of a loosely confederated group of criminal syndicates in the Southeast known as the Dixie Mafia. Dixie Mafia affiliates worked in several southern states, especially Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. Although there was no one Dixie Mafia, they sometimes coordinated activities and assisted other groups in their criminal operations. Not everyone in Phenix City was attached to criminal syndicates, but respectable citizens were either afraid or too apathetic to engage in earnest reform efforts. One man who grew up in Phenix City was Hugh Bentley. Like many, Bentley simply turned a blind eye to crime in Phenix City. The straw that broke the camel's back for Hugh Bentley came in 1944, when he and his friend Hugh Britton found a soldier almost dead lying near the Dillingham Street Bridge. They decided at that moment to take efforts to clean up their hometown. They chose to back Otis Taft, who was running against the Gamblers candidate Elmer Reese. It was as bitter and hard-fought a campaign as Phenix City had seen in a long time. Hugh Bentley and Hugh Britton attacked city government and county government, Mayor Homer Cobb and the city commission, and Elmer Reese. They never let up, and when election day came, they appointed themselves poll watchers to see to it that the ballots were cast according to the law. Hugh Bentley said that a blind man had been led from precinct to precinct and had voted 5 times, and Hugh Britton said the ballot boxes were being stuffed with tombstone votes. But nobody outside of the newspapers took much notice. When the votes were counted, Elmer Reese had won re-election to his seat by a better than 2-to-1 margin. This was cause for celebration on the part of Hoyt Shepherd and the great job the precinct workers had done to make it happen. They headed to the Southern Manor nightclub, and the drinks were on Hoyt. In addition to all the precinct workers, Hoyt Shepherd had gathered all of his friends around that night. His brother Grady, his partner Jimmy Matthews, and his old mentor Clyde Yarborough. They were all laughing, drinking, and joking about running Hugh Bentley out of town when Hoyt spotted Fate Lieburn across the room. Fate was his arch rival from Columbus, and he was sitting at a table with a Columbus beauty queen. Hoyt had warned Fate before that if he caught him on this side of the river, he'd kill him. Fate Lieburn was shot and killed that night. Grady Shepherd admitted to police the next day to killing Fate Lieburn in self-defense, with Hoyt Shepherd and Jimmy Matthews stated they were eyewitnesses to it. 1 week later, Hoyt and Jimmy were also arrested, charged with murder, and put in the same cell as Grady in the Russell County Jail. For his defense, Hoyt hired every lawyer in town, including the man who would later become his arch nemesis, Albert Patterson. Thanks to the efforts of Patterson, the other attorneys, and a rigged trial, Shepherd was acquitted. As for Albert Patterson, he believed that everyone deserved competent legal representation. But he turned on the syndicate and joined forces with Hugh Bentley and the group dedicated to cleaning up Phenix City. It was a move that would cost him his life and be the tipping point in the history of Phenix City. Albert Patterson began his political career in 1937 as a member of the Phenix City Board of Education. By 1940, he was also chairman of the Russell County Draft Board. In 1946, he was elected to the Alabama State Senate, where he served from 1947 to 1951 and helped introduce several important bills, including the Wallace-Cater Act, which allowed the use of state and municipal bonds to finance industrial plants, and the Trade School Act, which formed many of Alabama's trade schools. In the early 1950s, Patterson became involved with the Russell Betterment Association, or the RBA, which was conformed to combat the rampant vice and corruption occurring in Phenix City and Russell County. The RBA had been thwarted electing its candidates at the local level, and so it decided to nominate candidates for statewide office. Since Patterson had held a Senate seat, he was seen as the perfect candidate for the office of Attorney General. Behind me is the Coulter Building in Phenix City. This was the location of Albert Patterson's law office. It was here that the first serious attempt to take his life was made. One night after he left his law office, a fire broke out in the Coulter Building in his office. Fortunately, the only person who was in the building at the time was a janitor who discovered the fire and alerted authorities before any more serious damage could be done. Albert Patterson obtained a plurality in the 1954 Democratic primary and staged a runoff in May with Lee Red Porter of Gadsden, Alabama. In the runoff, early election results saw Patterson gain a seemingly insurmountable lead. That allegedly led Porter's Phenix City supporters to buy and to steal votes throughout the state to attempt to keep Patterson from victory. The results continued going back and forth until June 10th, when the Executive Committee of the Alabama Democratic Party declared Patterson the winner. Once Albert Patterson secured the Democratic nomination for Attorney General, he was virtually assured of winning the November election. After all, Alabama in those days was pretty much a one-party state. But he said to someone that he thought his chances of actually living to take office were about 100-to-1. It turned out his prediction was deadly accurate. On June 18th, 1954, that night, Albert Patterson left his law office. Now, the layout of this area is much different now than it was in the 1950s. But Albert Patterson was shot 3 times on the street just outside his law office. He was not able to name his attacker before he passed away. Several men were indicted and prosecuted for the murder of Albert Patterson. Only one man was convicted. Albert Fuller, a corrupt deputy sheriff, was sentenced to a life term and released after 10 years and died shortly after. On the evening of June 18, 1954, Patterson was working in his law office in the Coulter building in Phenix City. As he left about 9 p.m., he walked to his car, which was parked in an alley off 5th Avenue next to the Elite Cafe. An unidentified assailant walked up to Patterson, pushed a gun in his mouth, and shot him 3 times. One cartridge was found wedged in an opening, where 2 or 3 front teeth had been knocked out. Patterson was well aware that his life was in danger, commenting just one night earlier to a church group, "I have only a 100-to-1 chance of ever being sworn in as Attorney General." The state of Alabama and the federal government had finally had enough of Phenix City. Reaction from the state was swift. Within weeks, Governor Gordon Persons declared martial law in the city, effectively giving the Alabama National Guard the law enforcement duties in the city and the county. General Walter Hanna was tasked with heading the detachment that took over Phenix City. The state spent special prosecutors from Montgomery to replace the local judiciary. Within 6 months, the Phenix City machine was dismantled. A special grand jury in Birmingham handed down 734 indictments against local law enforcement officers, elected officials, and local business owners connected to organized crime. 3 officials were specifically indicted for Patterson's murder: Chief Deputy Albert Fuller, Circuit Solicitor Arch Farrell, and Attorney General Cy Garrett. Of the 3, only Fuller was convicted. He was sentenced to life imprisonment but was released after 10 years. Fuller died within the same year as his parole and claimed his innocence until his dying day. Farrell was acquitted, and Garrett was never brought to trial, as he was convalescing in a mental institution for most of the year after Patterson's murder. Patterson's son, John Malcolm Patterson, assumed the Democratic nomination for Attorney General. He won and took office in 1955. In 1958, John was elected Alabama governor with the endorsement of the Ku Klux Klan, running on the platform of fighting organized crime and public corruption. His defeated opponent was future governor and presidential candidate George Wallace, the face of segregation politics in the 1960s. This is a park bench and a statue dedicated to the memory of Albert Patterson. The inscription here reads as follows: "Sit with him and reflect on the sacrifice that Albert Patterson made to free this community from the grips of organized crime. He was killed across the street on June 18, 1954. The assassination of Albert Patterson was chronicled in several books and a critically acclaimed film titled The Phenix City Story, starring John McIntyre as Albert Patterson and Richard Kiley as John Patterson. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Crime Chronicles. As we delve into the darker side of human nature, we invite you to join us on our journey by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Your support helps make possible our inquiry into the sometimes unsettling but always fascinating phenomenon known as crime and justice. So hit that like and subscribe button right now and don't miss future episodes. Till then, Mark Jones, hoping you will join our Crime Chronicles community. And thanks for tuning in.